You'll marry that rancher's son, or I'll see you in the workhouse by dawn. Mayor Cornelius Wickham's fist slammed against the mahogany desk, making the oil lamp flicker ominously across his weathered face. Evangeline Rosecroft stood frozen in the dim parlor, her silk evening gloves still damp with champagne from the charity gala she'd just disrupted. The memory of hurling that crystal goblet at Judge Morrison's pompous head felt both thrilling and terrifying, now that the consequences loomed before her. "Papa, you cannot be serious," she whispered, though the iron set of her father's jaw told her otherwise. Marriage to some crude cowboy? For speaking my mind about his corrupt land dealings? Speaking your mind? Cornelius barked a bitter laugh. You publicly humiliated the most powerful judge in 3 counties, called him a thieving snake in front of half the town's elite. Through the lace curtains, Evangeline could see the flickering torches of angry townspeople still gathered in the square. Judge Morrison's allies were demanding justice, and her father, despite being mayor, was clearly cornered. The Whitmore family has agreed to the arrangement, Cornelius continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Their son, Lysander, needs a wife to help run their expanding cattle operation. You need to disappear from town before Morrison has you arrested for assault and public disturbance. Evangeline's breath caught. Lysander Whitmore. She'd heard whispers about him in the general store. The mysterious cowboy who'd returned from the war with secrets and scars, who could break wild mustangs with a gentle word, but hadn't been seen at a social gathering in over 2 years. I'd rather face jail than be sold like cattle, she declared, lifting her chin defiantly. Her father's expression darkened. The Whitmores leave for their winter ranch at dawn. You'll be on that wagon train as Lysander's bride, or you'll be in shackles by nightfall. Morrison has the sheriff in his pocket, and I can't protect you anymore. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, each note sealing her fate. Evangeline closed her eyes, remembering the rush of righteous fury that had possessed her. At the gala, Judge Morrison had been bragging about seizing Widow Patterson's farm for unpaid taxes he'd deliberately inflated to steal her land. Someone had to speak up. How long do I have to prepare? She asked quietly. Mrs. Pruitt is already packing your trunk. The wagon leaves at first light. Evangeline moved toward the stairs, her mind racing. She'd heard other whispers about Lysander Whitmore, that he was devastatingly handsome beneath his weathered exterior, that he treated his horses better than most men treated their wives, that he'd single-handedly defended his family's ranch against cattle rustlers last spring. Perhaps this punishment might prove more interesting than her father intended. After all, she'd always preferred wild stallions to tame geldings. As she climbed the stairs, Evangeline allowed herself a small, rebellious smile. If they wanted to exile her to the frontier, she'd make sure it was an adventure worth remembering. The wagon wheels crunched through frost-kissed grass as dawn painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Evangeline pulled her traveling cloak tighter, stealing glances at the silent figure driving the team of horses beside her. Lysander Whitmore hadn't spoken a word since helping her into the wagon an hour ago, his strong hands surprisingly gentle as he'd steadied her climb aboard. Now, in the growing daylight, she could study his profile without seeming too forward. The rumors hadn't done him justice. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his worn leather hat, and a thin scar traced from his left temple to his jaw, a mark that somehow made him more striking rather than diminished. When he'd removed his hat to introduce himself, she'd been startled by eyes the color of storm clouds, intense and unreadable. How far to your ranch? She ventured, breaking the comfortable silence. 3 days' ride to the winter spread, he replied, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her chest. Longer if the weather turns. Evangeline noticed how his weathered hands held the reins with practiced ease, how he seemed to anticipate the horse's needs before they expressed them. There was something almost musical in the way he communicated with the animals, soft clicks and murmured words that made their ears prick forward attentively. I should probably apologize, she said suddenly. For the circumstances, I mean. This arrangement couldn't have been what you wanted either. Lysander's lips quirked in what might have been amusement. What makes you think I didn't want it? The question caught her off guard. She'd assumed he was as reluctant as she'd initially. A man pressured into marriage for practical reasons. Well, that is, surely you'd prefer to choose your own bride. Maybe I did choose. His storm-gray eyes met hers briefly before returning to the trail ahead. Your reputation precedes you, Miss Rosecroft. Takes courage to stand up to corruption, even when it's costly. Heat bloomed in Evangeline's cheeks. You heard about the incident with Judge Morrison? Heard about it. Half the territory's talking about the mayor's daughter who threw a crystal goblet at Morrison's head and called him a land-stealing snake in front of God and everybody. Lysander's grin was sudden and transformative, turning his stern features boyishly handsome. Wish I'd been there to see it. You approve? She asked, surprised. Morrison's been squeezing small ranchers for years, forcing them to sell cheap to his associates. Someone needed to call him out. Lysander guided the horses around a fallen log with practiced skill. Though most folks don't have your particular style of justice. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the morning sun warming Evangeline's face. She found herself studying Lysander's hands again, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work, the careful way he handled the reins. There was something deeply appealing about his quiet competence. Can I ask you something? She said, as they crested a hill overlooking a valley dotted with cattle. Shoot. Why did you agree to marry me? Really? Lysander was quiet for so long. She thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, Been alone too long, I reckon. Ranch needs a woman's touch, and I need someone who isn't afraid of a fight. Life out here gets hard sometimes. His honesty was disarming. Evangeline felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. This wasn't the crude cowboy she'd imagined. This was a man who'd chosen her fire and her courage even when it came wrapped in scandal, Their wagon rolled toward an uncertain future. Evangeline realized her heart was racing for entirely new reasons. The winter ranch appeared like a mirage in the golden afternoon light, a sprawling log house with smoke curling from multiple chimneys, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and careful planning. But it was the sight of Lysander swinging down from the wagon seat, then turning to help her dismount, that made Evangeline's pulse quicken. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her down, and for a moment they stood close enough that she could smell leather and cedar on his clothes. The intensity in his storm-gray eyes made her knees weak. Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore, he said softly, and the words sent a thrill down her spine. We're not married yet, she reminded him, though her voice came out more breathless than she'd intended. Circuit preachers waiting inside. Figured you'd want to get it done proper. Lysander's thumb traced across her cheek with surprising tenderness. Unless you've changed your mind? Evangeline looked into his face. This man who'd chosen her. Courage over conventional beauty. Who'd defended her actions when the whole town condemned them. 3 days on the trail had shown her glimpses of his character. How he'd given her his bedroll when the temperature dropped. How he'd shared his coffee without being asked. How he'd patiently answered her endless questions about ranch life. No, she whispered. I haven't changed my mind. The wedding ceremony was simple but beautiful. Lysander had somehow procured wildflowers, late-blooming prairie roses that matched the flush in Evangeline's cheeks. His voice was steady as he spoke his vows, but she noticed his hands trembling, slightly when he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. After the preacher left, and the ranch hands had offered their congratulations, Lysander led Evangeline to the main house. The interior was far more refined than she'd expected. Polished wood floors, hand-woven rugs, and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. It's beautiful, she said, meaning it. My mother's touch. She passed 3 years ago, but I've tried to keep things the way she liked them. Lysander moved to light the oil lamps, the warm glow revealing bookcases lined with leather-bound volumes. Hope you like to read. Gets quiet out here in winter. Evangeline ran her fingers along the book spines, recognizing poetry collections and classic novels alongside practical volumes on animal husbandry. You read Byron? Guilty pleasure. Lysander's grin was sheepish. Don't tell the hands, they already think I'm half-civilized. Your secret's safe with me. Evangeline felt a flutter of excitement at this unexpected facet of her new husband's personality. Though I prefer Shelley myself. Music, when soft voices die, vibrates in the memory, Lysander quoted softly, moving closer. Odors, when sweet violets sicken, live within the sense they quicken. Evangeline's breath caught. This cowboy who gentled horses and read romantic. Poetry was far more dangerous to her heart than she'd anticipated. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Evangeline, he said, her name a prayer on his lips. I know this wasn't how either of us planned to find love, but… Love? She interrupted, her pulse racing. Lysander's eyes searched her face. Haven't you felt it? This past 3 days, watching you brave every challenge the trail threw at us, seeing your kindness with the horses, your curiosity about everything. He cupped her face in his hands. I've been falling for you since the moment you climbed into that wagon. Evangeline's heart soared. She'd been fighting the same feelings, afraid to name them, afraid to hope. I thought I was imagining it, she whispered. You weren't. Lysander's lips were inches from hers. May I kiss my wife? Her answer was to rise on her toes and meet him halfway. Winter settled over the ranch like a gentle blanket, and with it came a rhythm of life that Evangeline had never imagined possible. Each morning she woke beside Lysander in their shared bed, marveling at how natural it felt to be wrapped in his arms, listening to his steady heartbeat against her ear. Their marriage had bloomed into something beautiful and passionate. Lysander proved to be a generous lover, attentive to her needs, patient with her inexperience. But it was the small intimacies that stole her breath. The way he brought her coffee in bed on cold mornings, how he'd brush the snow from her hair after their walks, the quiet conversations by firelight that lasted until dawn. You're getting good at that, Lysander observed, watching Evangeline expertly bandage a cut on a young colt's leg. The animal stood perfectly still for her, responding to her gentle voice and steady hands. Good teacher, she replied, smiling. Up at him. In the months since their wedding, she'd thrown herself into learning ranch life. Lysander had been endlessly patient, teaching her to read horse behavior, showing her how to calculate feed ratios, explaining the intricacies of bloodlines and breeding programs. Better than good. You're a natural. Lysander pulled her close, nuzzling her temple. The horses trust you. That's not something you can teach. Evangeline leaned into his warmth, still amazed by how perfectly they fit together. Speaking of trust, I have something to tell you. Something in her tone made Lysander pull back to study her face. What is it? I'm with child. The words hung in the crisp winter air between them. Lysander went very still, his storm-gray eyes searching, her face with an intensity that made her heart race. You're sure? He asked softly. Evangeline nodded, suddenly nervous. They'd been married 4 months, had grown closer than she'd ever dreamed possible, but they'd never discussed children. Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday when he came to check on the injured stallion. I'm about 6 weeks along. Lysander was quiet for so long that Evangeline began to worry. Then suddenly, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing as snow swirled around their feet. A baby. He breathed against her hair when he finally set her down. Our baby. You're happy? Happy? Lysander's grin was radiant. Evangeline, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted. A partner, a love, a family. I'm beyond happy. That evening, they sat before the fire, planning nursery arrangements and debating names. Lysander's hand rested protectively over Evangeline's. Still flat stomach, his expression soft with wonder. Boy or girl, they'll be lucky to have you as a mother, he murmured. And you as a father. Evangeline covered his hand with hers, though I hope they inherit your way with animals, and your eyes. I hope they get your courage, Your fire. Lysander's lips brushed her temple. The way you stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Speaking of which, Evangeline took a breath knowing she had to share what had been weighing on her mind. I got a letter from Papa today. Judge Morrison's been arrested. Lysander straightened. What for? Land fraud. Bribery. Turns out my little outburst at the gala started people asking questions. An investigation turned up years of corruption. Evangeline smiled with satisfaction. The Patterson farm is being returned to the widow, along with 3 others Morrison stole. And your father? Clean, apparently. Morrison was operating without his knowledge. Evangeline traced patterns on Lysander's chest. Papa wants us to come for a visit. He's proud of me, he says, for standing up to Morrison. Lysander chuckled. Took him long enough to see what I saw from the beginning. You're a force of nature, Evangeline Whitmore. As if responding to the sound of its father's voice, the baby chose that moment to make its presence known with a flutter of movement. Evangeline gasped, pressing Lysander's hand more firmly against her belly. Did you feel that? She whispered. Lysander's eyes went wide with wonder. Our little fighter, he said softly, already making their presence known. Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. Evangeline's pregnancy was progressing beautifully, her belly now round and prominent. Beneath her loosened dresses, she'd taken over much of the ranch's bookkeeping, discovering a talent for numbers that impressed even Lysander's hard-headed foreman, Bartholomew Bart McKinnon. Mrs. Whitmore figured out how to cut our feed costs by 15%, Bart reported. To Lysander, as they watched Evangeline gentle a skittish mare in the main corral. She's got a head for business, that wife of yours. Lysander felt his chest swell with pride. She's got a head for everything, he replied, unable to hide his adoration as he watched Evangeline coax the nervous horse to accept a bridle. Even 6 months pregnant, she moved with grace and confidence that took his breath away. But their peaceful existence was about to be shattered. The riders appeared on the horizon just as Evangeline was finishing her work with the mare. Dust clouds announced their approach long before Lysander could make out the details. But something about their formation, deliberate and aggressive, made his hand drift instinctively toward his sidearm. Bart, get the boys ready, he ordered quietly, and get Evangeline inside. I'm not going anywhere, Evangeline said firmly, having overheard. Who are they? Lysander's jaw tightened as the lead rider came into focus. Stocky build, silver badge. Glinting on his chest, cruel eyes beneath a low-brimmed hat. Sheriff Hawkins, Morrison's lapdog. But Morrison's in jail. His trial's next week. Apparently, some folks still think they can intimidate witnesses. Lysander moved protectively in front of Evangeline as the sheriff and his 4 deputies reined in their horses just outside the corral fence. Whitmore, Sheriff Hawkins drawled, his gaze sliding past Lysander to leer at Evangeline. Heard you. Got yourself a pretty little wife, the troublemaker from town. State your business, Hawkins. Lysander's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Judge Morrison's got friends who don't appreciate liars and thieves stirring up trouble. Hawkins spat in the dirt. Your wife's testimony could send a good man to prison. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to her. Or that baby she's carrying. The threat hung in the air like poison. Lysander felt Evangeline's hand slip into his, felt her trembling despite her brave front. Behind him, he could sense Bart and the other ranch hands positioning themselves strategically. You just threatened my pregnant wife, Lysander said conversationally, but his eyes had gone Arctic cold. On my property, in front of witnesses. Did I? Hawkins grinned nastily. Just expressing concern for her health. Trail to the county seat's dangerous. Lots of accidents can happen to folks traveling alone. Then it's lucky she won't be traveling. Alone. Lysander's smile was sharp as a blade. See, I'll be right beside her, along with 10 of my best men. All armed, all very protective of Mrs. Whitmore. Hawkins's confidence flickered. You can't fight the law, Whitmore. I'm not fighting the law. I'm fighting corruption. Lysander stepped forward, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun. "And if anything happens to my wife or child, I'll hold you personally responsible. That's not a threat, Sheriff. That's a promise." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Finally, Hawkins yanked his horse's head around. "Trial's next Wednesday. Be there, Mrs. Whitmore. Wouldn't want to add contempt of court to your husband's troubles." After they rode away, Evangeline sagged against Lysander, her brave facade cracking. "Lysander, what if they won't." His arms came around her, strong and protective. "I won't let anything happen to you or our baby, I promise." But as they watched the dust cloud disappear over the ridge, both of them knew their peaceful winter was over. The real fight was just beginning. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Evangeline took her place in the witness box. Her pregnancy was obvious now at 7 months, her hand resting protectively over her belly as she faced Judge Morrison across the packed courtroom. Lysander sat in the front row, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of hostile faces surrounding them. "Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison's defense attorney began with an oily smile, "isn't it true that you have a history of dramatic outbursts? That you're prone to hysteria and wild accusations?" "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "Relevance? I'll allow it," the judge ruled, though he looked uncomfortable. Evangeline lifted her chin, channeling the courage that had gotten her into this mess and led her to the love of her life. "I have a history of speaking truth to power, sir. If that qualifies as hysteria, in your opinion, then I suppose I'm guilty as charged." A murmur ran through the courtroom. In the gallery, she could see Sheriff Hawkins glowering, several of Morrison's cronies shifting uncomfortably, and, to her surprise, a number of townspeople nodding approvingly. "Let me refresh your memory," the attorney continued. "You publicly assaulted Judge Morrison at a charity gala, did you not?" "I threw a crystal goblet, yes, after he bragged about seizing Widow Patterson's farm through fraudulent tax assessments." "Allegedly fraudulent?" "No," Evangeline interrupted firmly. "Fraudulent. The documents are right there on your table, sir. Tax assessments inflated by 300%, dated and signed by Judge Morrison himself, along with the deed transfers to his business associates for half the land's actual value." The attorney's face flushed. "Your Honor, the witness is arguing with counsel." "She's answering your question," the prosecutor interjected smoothly. "Rather thoroughly, I'd say," Evangeline continued, her voice clear and unwavering. "Judge Morrison didn't just steal one farm. The evidence shows he orchestrated the theft of 7 properties over 5 years, displacing families and lining his own pockets. When I heard him boasting about his clever business arrangements, I couldn't remain silent. So you assaulted him." "I expressed my displeasure with a piece of glassware. Hardly the crime of the century, considering he stole people's homes." Laughter rippled through the courtroom despite the tension. Evangeline caught Lysander's eye and saw pride blazing in his storm-gray gaze. His slight nod gave her the strength to continue. "Mrs. Whitmore," Morrison's attorney tried a different tack. "Isn't it convenient that these so-called fraudulent documents only came to light after your outburst?" "Not convenient, necessary. Judge Morrison had been intimidating anyone who questioned his methods. It took someone without a farm or business to lose before the truth could come out. Someone with a rich rancher husband to protect her." Evangeline's eyes flashed. "I married my husband after I threw that goblet, sir. I stood up to corruption when I had nothing but my own conscience to guide me." The prosecutor stood for redirect. "Mrs. Whitmore, in your opinion, why did Judge Morrison feel safe bragging about his illegal activities at a public gathering?" "Because he thought no one would dare challenge him. He'd created a climate of fear through his position and his alliance with Sheriff Hawkins." "Objection!" the defense attorney shouted. "Sustained! The jury will disregard!" But it was too late. Evangeline had connected the dots publicly, and everyone in the courtroom understood the implications. When she stepped down from the witness stand, Lysander was there to help her navigate the steps, his hand warm and steady on her arm. As they walked toward the exit, Evangeline noticed something that made her heart soar. The townspeople who had once condemned her were now looking at her with respect, even admiration. Outside the courthouse, Widow Patterson waited with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing a weathered hand to Evangeline's cheek. "You gave me back my home." That evening, as they sat by the fire in their ranch house, a messenger arrived with news. Judge Morrison had been convicted on all counts. Sheriff Hawkins had been arrested as an accessory. The stolen lands would be returned to their rightful owners. "You did it," Lysander murmured, pulling Evangeline close. "You brought down the whole corrupt system." Evangeline smiled, feeling their baby kick as if celebrating the victory. "We did it. I couldn't have survived any of this without you." As if responding to their parents' voices, the baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick. Evangeline gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "I think someone's ready to meet the world," she said breathlessly. Lysander's eyes went wide as he felt the contraction ripple across Evangeline's abdomen. "Now?" "Now," she confirmed, excitement and nervousness warring in her voice. Their greatest adventure was about to begin. Dawn broke over the ranch as Evangeline's labor pains intensified. Dr. Henley had arrived in the early hours, his calm presence reassuring in the lamplight of their bedroom. Lysander paced the hallway outside, wearing a path in the floorboards despite Bart's attempts to distract him with ranch business. "Lysander!" Evangeline called out during a brief respite between contractions. "Come here!" He was beside her in an instant, taking her sweat-dampened hand in both of his. "I'm here. What do you need?" "Just you," she whispered, squeezing his fingers as another wave of pain began. "Stay with me." "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he promised, pressing his lips to her forehead. Hours passed in a blur of pain and encouragement, hope and fear. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, Dr. Henley announced, "I can see the head. One more push, Mrs. Whitmore." Evangeline summoned every ounce of strength she possessed, drawing from the same well of courage that had led her to stand up to Judge Morrison, to embrace an arranged marriage that became true love, to build a life in this beautiful, challenging frontier. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and indignant, and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Henley announced with a smile. "A beautiful, healthy baby girl." Lysander's face was wet with tears as the doctor placed their daughter in Evangeline's arms. She was perfect, dark hair like her father's, but with Evangeline's determined chin and what looked like might become storm-gray eyes. "Hello, little one," Evangeline whispered, overwhelmed with love so fierce it took her breath away. "We've been waiting for you." "She's perfect," Lysander breathed, his finger gently stroking their daughter's tiny hand. The baby's grip was surprisingly strong as she wrapped her miniature fingers around his. "Just like her mama." "What should we call her?" Evangeline asked, and they'd discussed names for months, but looking at their daughter now, only one seemed right. "Victoria," Lysander said softly. "For victory. She's born from your courage, your fight for what's right." "Victoria Rose Whitmore," Evangeline agreed, thinking of the prairie roses Lysander had given her on their wedding day. "Tori for short." As if approving of her name, baby Victoria opened her eyes and seemed to study her parents with surprising focus. Evangeline laughed through her tears. "She's already curious about everything, just like her papa said she'd be." Later that evening, as Evangeline nursed their daughter by the fire, Lysander sat beside them reading aloud from Shelley. Victoria seemed to find his deep voice soothing, her tiny fist resting against her mother's breast as she fed. "The fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean," he read. "The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single. All things by a law divine in one another's being mingle. Why not I with thine?" "Why not indeed?" Evangeline murmured, remembering their first evening together when he'd quoted poetry by lamplight. "How did you—" "No, Lysander. That first night when you quoted Shelley. How did you know it would work between us?" Lysander set the book aside and gathered his wife and daughter closer. "I didn't know. I hoped. I saw your fire, your courage, your refusal. to accept injustice, and I thought, here's a woman who won't let life make her small, who won't let anyone else make decisions for her family. I was so angry about the arranged marriage, Evangeline admitted. If someone had told me I'd be this happy, this grateful for Papa's ultimatum, I'd have thought them mad. Sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances. Lysander pressed a kiss to the top of baby Victoria's downy head. Your father thought he was punishing you. Instead, he gave us each other. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Bart poked his head in, his gruff face unusually gentle. Sorry to bother, boss, but there's someone here to see you folks. Mayor Cornelius Wickham stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking older and more humble than Evangeline had ever seen him. Papa? She gasped. I came as soon as I heard, he said, his voice thick with emotion. About the baby, about the trial. Evangeline, I owe you an apology. A dozen apologies. Papa, you don't need to. I do. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with tears as he looked at his granddaughter. I thought I was saving you from scandal, but you were saving us all. The corruption you exposed? It went deeper than just Morrison. Half the county government was involved. Your courage started an investigation that cleaned out decades of graft. Lysander stood, extending his hand to his father-in-law. You're welcome here, sir. Anytime. Cornelius shook his hand gratefully, then turned back to Evangeline. Can you forgive a foolish old man who was too proud to see he'd raised the strongest woman in 3 counties? Evangeline felt tears spill over. There's nothing to forgive, Papa. You brought me to Lysander. You gave me the chance to find real love. As her father held his granddaughter for the first time, cooing over her tiny features and promising to spoil her thoroughly, Evangeline leaned into Lysander's embrace. Outside, the first stars were appearing over their ranch, their land, their life together. No regrets? Lysander murmured against her hair. Evangeline looked around their cozy parlor, at her father bonding with baby Victoria, at the books lining the shelves, at the fire crackling warmly in the hearth. Through the window, she could see the horses in their corrals, the life they'd built together through love and hard work and unwavering trust. Not a single one, she said softly. This punishment turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life. In agreement, baby Victoria gurgled contentedly in her grandfather's arms, and the sound of 3 generations of family filled the ranch house with joy. The arranged marriage that began as exile had become homecoming. The forced union had become the truest love, and the woman who'd thrown a goblet in defiance of corruption had found her place as the heart of something beautiful and lasting. In the frontier town of Cedar Falls, they would tell the story for generations, how Evangeline Rosecroft's moment of righteous fury led not just to justice, but to a love story that proved sometimes the best surprises come, wrapped in the most unlikely. Packages,